So there we were, the two of us strolling carefree, hand in hand across the soft sand. It was warm enough for sunbathing, but late enough that even at this modern beach resort in North Africa, there was no risk of getting sunburned. Jane and I had flown in the night before, excited to escape the damp fall weather that had descended on our native London. And we were also delighted that our employers had decided to reward us for our excellent results from the last project we had worked on together. As for the lovely Jane, medium height, medium-sized breasts, hair I think a rather average shade of brown, but she was more than medium attractive. I've always been a leggy person myself, so the fact that I barely noticed what beautiful big brown eyes she had when I first met her speaks volumes about how short her skirts were and what a great pair of stilettos she was wearing. We weren't actually married, but we were partners, and have been for the last year or so, and unfortunately for me, Jane has made it clear that partners are something she's not going to go for just yet. Who's complaining? I chatted with the prettiest girl on the block. There's those two guys, Jane broke the silence, noticing them long before me. I'd seen them earlier during breakfast when they'd sort of casually taken the table next to us and then stared at her the whole time. I couldn't blame them, of course, but it wasn't easy to hide my real feelings when she responded to them with a token smile. The fact that we were approaching a part of the beach where they didn't care too much about how much, or more to the point, how little the sun worshippers were wearing didn't lessen my anxiety about how the day would go. "Here's Ken," Jane announced, unwrapping her beach towel as I realized we were a stone's throw away from them, and naturally I knew better than to argue. It was another aspect of our relationship that didn't always suit me, but I was well aware that it was either that or no way. "I think I've got some admirers, Ken," Jane whispered to me as I lay down before her, knowing full well that they had both interrupted their conversation to watch her quite deliberately undo the buttons on her shirt and toss it aside, and then her denim miniskirt, leaving her standing there in the tiny bikini she'd bought especially for the occasion. A bikini that, judging by how much it cost and how little it was, had to be worth its weight in gold. Not satisfied with how revealing her outfit was, Jane looked around, seemingly oblivious to the attention to herself, and with a shrug, quickly reached behind her back, unbuttoned the bikini, and tossed it into the small pile of discarded clothing at her feet. It was hard not to stare at her as she fiddled with her hair, keenly aware of how beautifully her loose breasts jiggled, but I took the opportunity to examine the two guys she was so blatantly putting on a free show for. One, sandy-haired, rough-looking, looked to be about my age. He was in his early 30s. The other, a dark-skinned, smooth operator, was closer to Jane's age, around 20. I couldn't deny that women would find either of them attractive. Damn it. The next half hour or so was a nightmare, with Jane primping, posing, offering them her bare breasts on a platter, and them lying there absorbing it all, smirking and throwing weird smirks at me. I knew what I was getting into when I started my relationship with Jane, and I couldn't deny that it was clear to me. But that didn't make it any easier. It didn't make it any easier at all. When I couldn't take their pitying looks anymore, I was ready to drop everything and leave her to them. But my pride wouldn't let me do that, so instead I rolled over onto my back and pretended to doze off. What a relief that gave me. At least I could pretend not to notice Jane's flirting and teasing, and only the giggling and snickering of the two bastards let me know what she was still doing. God, I didn't sign up for this kind of treatment. "Are you asleep, honey?" she demanded a few decibels louder than necessary. "I'm going for a swim in the sea, Ken," she continued when I didn't answer, and I only managed to hum in response, looking through half-closed eyes at what she was up to. "Angry? You don't know the half of it." And it didn't get any better when the sassy bitch stood up, brushed imaginary grains off her firm breasts, and walked towards the beach, treading carefully between the two of them, even though she could have easily gone around them. What a truly obvious thing to do. I know I shouldn't have been upset, and I know we had agreed it would be like this. But being a wimp doesn't come naturally to me, no matter how deep my feelings for this girl are. Laughing, probably for my benefit, both jumped to their feet and ran after Jane, the older one putting his arm around her shoulders when he caught up, while the other, darker one, put his arm around her waist. Not that she stayed there for long. My insides twisted unbearably as I looked up to see his large, dark hand standing out against her white skin, slowly sink lower, meeting no objection from her. Even as his hand slipped down under the strapline of her bikini, and there she remained, save for a few tentative movements, until they entered the sea and her legs, and then her lower body, on which his hand still rested, disappeared beneath the water. Too much for any man, and at that moment it was too much for me. Jumping to my feet and grabbing a towel, I rushed back to the beach, away from the scene of my torment. I guess they didn't even notice. 2 hours passed, and everything fell into place. I watched, increasingly furious, as Jane returned to our hotel, her tight shirt barely concealing the obvious fact that she hadn't bothered to put on a bra, and her 2 suitors flitted around her, flirting and playfully touching, to the embarrassment of several other guests. Time to put an end to this farce. After giving them time to go up to our room, I was left standing outside trying to get my emotions under control. "Not yet, Ken. Give them time," my companion insisted. "No, I didn't come alone. Are you kidding me? There were 2 of them." "Wait for the signal," he added, turning to the 4 men standing just behind us. Large men in uniform, the uniforms of the local police. Just then, a buzzer went off in my pocket. Jane pressed the button of the bracelet on her wrist. If this were a Hollywood movie, a heavy gang would have kicked down the door and we would have all piled inside with screams and yells. But what actually happened was this. I put the key card in the door lock, and we all went in completely quietly. The 2 guys we'd been after for the last month or more were so shocked that they barely reacted at all, submissively handing themselves over to the local cops who, by prior arrangement, took them to a place where they would be scared to death. The kind of prison that no longer existed in Blighty. The last and most senior officer kept to himself, guarding the evidence that the drugs were on display and about to be consumed, though it was clear he had another reason for the delay. "Inspector Clark," my colleague addressed me formally, though a wide grin played across his face. "May I suggest that you ask Sergeant Jones to get dressed? I think she's upsetting the locals." "Jane," I encouraged her, raising my eyebrows. "Okay, Ken," she giggled, got up from the bed, which she hadn't moved from since we'd entered the room, and started pulling her bikini up to the level it was supposed to be at. She seemed to think that was enough, and my boss, Superintendent Kennedy, was happy with that. And the still smiling local guy certainly didn't seem to mind. "Well, it seems to have worked out, doesn't it?" sang out Jane, a serving police officer like myself, who had been my partner in the police force for the last year, as I had explained earlier, clearly not embarrassed by the fact that she was standing half naked in front of 2 senior officers, and judging by the smile on her face, was enjoying it immensely. "Of course," our boss agreed, trying not to stare too obviously at his subordinate's bare breasts, which seemed unable to keep from bouncing. "In this country, where drugs are concerned, the law considers minors under 25 to be underage, and they can lock them up and throw away the key. Maybe they wouldn't go to jail, of course, but these 2 don't know that. And a week in this hellhole they call prison will soon have them singing at the top of their voices." "Spilling the beans on a drug gang in London," I grinned. "Nailed a couple," Jane added, throwing her hands up in the air and making our boss almost choke as he tried not to look at her bouncing breasts. "Great job," I said. "We had to change rooms because ours had turned into a crime scene, and the photographer who showed up seemed more interested in taking pictures of Jane than the evidence, and only calmed down when she put her shirt back on." The shirt lasted only 5 minutes after we got to our new room, and the bikini briefs followed. "I feel dirty afterward and I need a shower," Jane told me. "Do you want to join me?" Okay, maybe we were partners only in a professional sense. But the unusual methods we used invariably led us into compromising situations, and almost inevitably into becoming a kind of workmate with benefits. "It's getting harder and harder for you, isn't it?" asked Jane unexpectedly. "Well, if you keep it up, of course I am," I replied, stating what I thought was quite obvious given the way she was snuggling up to me under the jets of water. "No, silly," she laughed. I mean, I see me hanging around with other men. I shrugged, not wanting to admit it to her, since my feelings for her had long since transcended our professional relationship. Me too, she marveled. Not that I still don't enjoy showing off my naked charms and stuff, but I don't like it when you get upset. Are you suggesting we break the partnership? I asked, trying to hide the heartache in my voice. Quite the opposite, Ken, honey, she squeaked, snuggling even tighter against me. How about we make this more official? You mean, yes, Ken. Are you sure? I've never been so sure. But how do we get the powers to relieve you of your present duties? You, even we, have made such progress. They'd have to do that if I were pregnant, Jane whispered, suddenly becoming a little self-conscious. You're not pregnant? I gasped in surprise. No, but I might be soon if you stop using those damn condoms. Jane giggled in response. Epilogue. You don't need this. I bet you can guess what happened, can't you? Jane clearly didn't mind getting naughty, but her wild days were clearly over and she was ready to settle down. That's what happened, isn't it? What? Oh!